and welcome back to Disney Journey. I'm retired Imagineer Jim Schill, and this time I'm going to explore the story of a little lost girl, Alice, and how she found her way into Disneyland parks around the world. It's a gross understatement to say that Alice has been part of the Disney park experience since the very beginning. After all, look at this. Alice has a parking lot space all devoted to herself. It's been a teacup, it's been a dark ride, it's been character greeting, it's been photo op, it's been everything. Now, it started in Anaheim because that was the very first park by Walt. But the idea of Alice was successful and it translated throughout the entire world. The Disney legend Bruce Bushman explored a lot of ideas when he was designing Fantasyland in Anaheim. He looked at the catalog of Disney features and he selected from that catalog a lot of ideas that could be applied to this brand new land, everything that would live behind the castle walls. Now, obviously, not everything got built, but many were explored. The Disney legend Bruce Bushman extracted from the Alice film all the necessary components to make a great attraction. The one he focused on, though, was the one that came directly out of the movie, which was the story of a little girl lost who had to find her way home. And one of the greatest expressions of that was a maze. The original design for the Alice walkthrough that Bruce Bushman not only drew, but laid out, down to the point of putting a scale. It shows how people would be walking through that world of Alice, those environments, and express them in a kind of a playground environment. As good as it was, it had drawbacks. It meant that there'd be a lot of cast members to staff it, and everything would be very, very touchable. And we all know if somebody touches it, it wears quickly. And given the fact that, people are unfortunately a little more aggressive than they might need to be. The bags that look like an object from the movie that you could push into someone, that might cause some damage that the park would not want to have. Aside from the maintenance issue, you also have the ride capacity issue. In the case where you don't have a ride, an attraction's total capacity is reliant upon the speed of your slowest guest, which limits capacity, which is not a good thing. The obvious solution was to contain the guests in a common conveyance, one that was known and proven in trolley parks and amusement parks of that era. And that way, everything that Bruce Bushman had designed so carefully could be presented to the guests as they entered the world of Alice in Wonderland. The world of Alice is a rich one for which the Imagineers drew on. Today in Anaheim, it's a mini land. It consists of the spinning teacups, a dark ride, a shop, a photo op, a character greeting, a whole bunch of things. And it really fleshes out a corner of Fantasyland in a rich and unique way. Aside from the fact that it's the only teacup that does not have a roof. The legacy of Alice in Wonderland inspired the expansion into other parks. Although the expansions weren't always in the way that you would expect them to be. The idea of a maze had merit, but the expression was going to be very different. No good idea ever dies at Disney Imagineering, and the idea of a walk-through maze continued to percolate under the surface until it found the opportunity to be built. And the opportunity came courtesy of a little mouse who was celebrating a birthday. So a maze was built in Mickey's Birthday Land there in the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. Now, granted, it wasn't grand, it wasn't great, and it was meant to be temporary. But it did prove to the operators and to the Imagineers that yes, indeed, the idea of a maze that would appeal to the guests had merit. And this was an idea that had proof now. And it would be one that would surface again, not in Anaheim, not in Florida, but over in Paris. And the Paris version, we draw an inspiration from the work of Mary Blair. One thing we always forget about Mary is she was gifted in fine arts. And years ago, there was a wonderful exhibit there at the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco where her fine work was displayed. Not just her Disney work, but she was a gifted and, well, a talent that we lost all too soon. But for now, we get to remember Mary Blair and her contributions to Alice in Wonderland. The afternoon I spent looking at Mary's work there at the Disney Family Museum was one of my favorite afternoons ever. Her work stays with me. Her simple shapes, her color blocking, her choices were unique and special, and they certainly make her a Disney legend. Setting out to create the world of Alice in Wonderland is no easy task, and it requires a lot of stuff, like plants. You know, you can't build a hedge maze without plants. Kind of a no-brainer, but where do you get the plants? Where do you get those specialized plants? And for that, the answer is, well, I found myself on a plane heading to northern Germany, which was cold and wet and damp, but it had a nursery named Bruns. Now, that nursery specialized in high-end specialty and specimen plants. Essentially, you could walk over hectares of land and find just about anything you wanted. And so I did. And with a team of Imagineers, I would find things that I thought really did work with the story that I was trying to tell and have them tagged. And the tag meant, well, we were going to be cutting them a very big check to be sending that material, which is what they called it, plant material, down to Montevalli to build the hedge maze that guests get to see in Curious Labyrinth, Alice's Curious Labyrinth. Walking into Bruns Nursery is like walking to the supermarket of plants. If you want a heart, they've got it. A swan, no problem. And if a swan is no problem, then imagine how many cones you could buy. Cones of all sizes, spread across acres and acres of land, just waiting to be purchased. Bring your checkbook. You can be overwhelmed by them, but there's always something delightful to see. Peace and love, Mickey Mouse. Once it was decided to bring Alice in Wonderland to Disneyland Paris in its Fantasyland, the question which was answered was quickly, in what form? And for that, they returned to an original idea of Bruce Bushman's, which was to build a hedge maze. Now, there are a couple reasons for that. One of them is that the British have a great and rich history of building hedge mazes. So taking the plants that have been procured, building set pieces, creating interactives, sculpting themed plaster to look like rock work. And so the world of Alice in Wonderland started to emerge, and Alice's Curious Labyrinth took form. As I said earlier, you buy a lot of plant material, you make your show sets elsewhere, like the door, and they all have to be assembled and put together. And in time, the world of Alice's Curious Labyrinth took form there in Fantasyland, as all of these components were assembled to make a whole. And there's a lot of Easter eggs, like most people don't see from above and realize, oh, that is the Cheshire Cat. Or looking across the hedges where you can see the Cheshire as his eyes rotate. Or you see him in the tree. Or you see the signs in the tree. Or you see the sculpted plaster that looks like stonework. Eventually, if you follow the maze, you'll go to the Red Queen's Castle, from which you have these beautiful observation deck. And these views we could see across the park. And also, at one point, you could look across at a future expansion field that became the home of Casey Jr. and the Storybook Land Canal. As the designer of Storybook Land and Casey Jr., one of my goals was to try to create a space that looks like it was intended to be there in Fantasyland from day one. Because after all, with the Labyrinth maze, you really have to respect it. It's a thing of beauty. As you walk through the maze, you go down the tunnel, which is actual real plant material, not artificial. So finally, Bruce Bushman's idea of a maze was realized. We can see in Disneyland Paris the beginnings of mini lands, because you don't just have a maze. You have the maze next to a teacup, next to a dyeing facility, next to a photo op. And this was a template that would be followed for Alice. And not just Alice. You see that so often now in the Disney parks. Because if you don't have enough intellectual property to support a full land, well, maybe the mini land is the way to go. The Alice Maze is also a playground because there guests can play with water or turn cranks and devices. They can see the characters they know and love from the films. I remember seeing the teacups come up out of the ground. And to this day, I still contend that roof is still the most beautiful roof covering any of the teacups in any of the Disney parks. Alice in Paris combines the teacup ride with a walk-up food facility surrounded by beautiful landscaping. And as I just said, it's the most beautiful roof of any of the Alice teacup rides in any of the parks worldwide. The character, the care, even the signage is spectacular, and it continues after 3 decades and more to provide real show value to the guests. Not every Disney park or castle park has an Alice maze. Well, no, scratch that. There's one that does have a maze, but you can't get to it. And this is the one at Tokyo Disneyland. With a mini land, you have the ability to carve off sections of it as appropriate. So in the case of Tokyo Disneyland, they don't have the Alice ride, but they do have a teacup, and they don't have a maze unless you count the one on the roof of the restaurant. Now, the restaurant came late because the teacup was already there, and the restaurant occupied a space that once had been a parking lot. And the reason why they built the restaurant is because the restaurant they did have on the other side of Small World was about to be torn down to be occupied by Pooh's Honey Hut. Now, the park needed a restaurant, and so they claimed that existing empty, vacant parking lot to build the Alice restaurant. What's interesting about it is when you look at it, you don't see the Red Queen after whom the restaurant is named. After all, the Red Queen is scary, and very likely, guests with small children, they'd probably look at that restaurant with the glowering queen on it on the outside and say, I don't care how hungry I am, I'm not going to go in there. Which is a loss, and I hope they come back when they're older, because inside that restaurant is some of the best food I've ever had in Tokyo Disneyland. And in addition to that, a beautiful and rich environment. Moving on to the next Alice, we go to Hong Kong Disneyland. That has an Alice maze, only without Alice. When we look at Hong Kong Disneyland, we see an example where elements of the Alice world were pulled apart. There at the Hong Kong Disneyland Hotel, there is a real hedge maze. Of course, there's no branding of Alice on that maze, but it doesn't make it any less fun. Turning our attention to the proper, however, we do see the teacup ride. And outside of that, we see some of the character sculpts and the giant leaves that we first saw there in Anaheim. It's a good example where if you have a kit of parts, they can be pulled apart and applied in different locations in different ways. Hong Kong Disneyland is the smallest in area of any of the Disney castle parks. But what it lacks in size, it makes up in show, because they've invested in that park since the day it opened. And today it has a list of very unique attractions like the hedge maze and the hotel. The best way to see the attractions is to climb aboard the Disneyland Railroad, because the Hong Kong Disneyland Railroad travels around the park on a grand circle tour, just like the original does in Anaheim. As I travel on the train, I always think to myself, this at once looks so familiar and yet different, which is really what this park has evolved into. I know it's a long way to travel to, but Hong Kong Disneyland should be on the bucket list of any Disney park fan because it's both familiar and unique. And you get to see things that you can't see anywhere else. And frankly, isn't that why anyone goes to a Disney park? To see things that are unique and special. Turning our gaze to Shanghai Disneyland, we see another Alice maze, but it's not one that Bruce Bushman or Mary Blair would be familiar with, because this is an Alice maze that's based on a property of the film that Tim Burton directed. and stylized. And it's a very different look. It's a lot more hard-edged and darker. But it makes a lot of sense because that's the movie that the local guests in China would be familiar with. Not the animated film, but the Tim Burton version. Whether it's successful or not, I'll let you judge. I saw it come up out of the ground and I walked it several times, and it has a lot of merits. The interesting thing though about it is it a maze? Well, a maze is a place you get lost in, and this is not a maze you can get lost in unless you really, really try. There are a couple of dead ends, but I don't think that's a maze. In the Paris version, there truly is a maze that you can get lost in. Actually, there are two mazes. There's the one that we call the child's friendly maze, and it's a lot of stuff you can wander around and explore in, but you never get lost. The adult maze is the one you can get lost. But it's the fun one because it led to the Red Queen's castle, and once you climb to the very, very top, you could have a view shed of looking out over all of Disneyland Paris. When that park opened, you didn't have to climb down the staircase. Oh no, you could actually take a slide down. It didn't last long because not too many years after that park opened and the maze opened, there was a barrier set up at the top of the slide. It's time to travel again, this time to Shanghai Disneyland. To that park's Fantasyland, where we'll find another Alice attraction. This one will be a walkthrough. In fact, it'll be a maze. But it's not going to be like the mazes that we found in the other parks. Oh no, that'd be too easy. This one is not going to be based on the feature-length animated movie. It'll be based on the live-action version, the one directed by Tim Burton, which is a very odd, very unique spin on that story. The Alice Maze in Shanghai Disneyland is an example of making a decision to apply intellectual property that's current to an attraction. The issue is going to be maybe the guests know it, but in 20 years, if you don't support the property, it may have fallen off guest radar and they'll look at it and maybe enjoy it, but they'll be puzzled by what it is that they're trying to enjoy. I'll make the argument here that you can have two things, have them be similar, but not be the same. In the case of Shanghai's Alice, it's something that's interesting to look at. It has a lot to recommend it. It's very different. It's not based on the original animated version, but there is some merit to it. And people who maybe didn't see either version could walk in and have a great time. And isn't that the point of this? It might be better if it had the Mary Blair version, but you can't say this one's bad. Few characters have been represented as consistently as has Alice in Wonderland in the Disney parks. For almost 70 years, she has been represented in various forms in all the different Disney parks worldwide. I have no doubt that she'll continue to entertain guests in the future in all of her various forms. And with that, we bring this episode of Disney Journey to a close. Please continue to like, subscribe, share, and send me your comments. Until the next time then, it's goodbye from Lost Canyon.